You know what nobody tells you when you are 25 years old and starting your first real job? That the retirement you are being promised right now might not actually be there by the time you get there. And I don't mean that in some vague, hedge your bets kind of way. I mean that right now, in 2026, there are 11.2 million Americans over the age of 65 who are still punching a clock. Not because they chose this, not because they had some great second act planned, but because the financial foundation that was supposed to carry them through retirement has either fallen short, collapsed, or is about to be gutted in a way that Washington does not want to talk about directly. And what just came out of the Congressional Budget Office last month makes all of this worse. So, let's get into it, because this affects every single one of you watching this, no matter what age you are right now. In 1985, 10.8% of Americans over 65 were still in the workforce. That was the low point. Pensions still existed. Social Security was holding together. The system was working more or less the way it was supposed to. Since then, that number has gone up every single year. And where are we now? 19.5% of Americans aged 65 and older are still working as of 2024, nearly 1 in 5. Between 2015 and 2024 alone, senior workforce participation jumped by more than 33%. The overall workforce only grew 9% during that same period. So, older Americans are entering or staying in the workforce at more than 3 times the rate of everyone else combined. Now here's the part that should be making front page news. The Bureau of Labor Statistics projects that by 2033, 14.8 million Americans over 65 will still be in the workforce. That means roughly 1 in every 12 American workers will be 65 or older. And if you think that is just because people are healthier and living longer and just happen to love their jobs, keep watching, because the data tells a very different story. An AARP survey from February 2026 found that 7% of people who had already retired went back to work in just the previous 6 months. 3.5 million people crossed the finish line, tried to actually live on what they had, and went back. And when AARP asked why, the number one answer by a wide margin was money. 48% said making money was their primary motivation, not purpose, not boredom, financial survival. So let's look at the actual math, because this is where the whole picture locks in. Social Security pays an average of $2,071 per month in 2026. That is after the 2.8% cost of living adjustment that just took effect. $2,071 per month works out to about $2,452 per year. Sounds like something until you put it next to the fact that average annual expenses for Americans over 65 run about $62,000 per year. That is not a lavish lifestyle. That is housing, healthcare, food, utilities, transportation, and insurance. The basics. So Social Security, the program you paid into for your entire working career, covers roughly 40% of what it actually costs to live. The other 60% has to come from somewhere. And guys, for a massive portion of this country, that somewhere is either empty or nearly empty. A Government Accountability Office study found that about half of all households age 55 and older had zero savings in any 401k, IRA, or employer retirement plan. Not a small amount, zero. And among the households that did have something saved, the median balance was $109,000. Now, $109,000 sounds decent until you do this math. You retire at 65, you live to 85, that is 20 years. $109,000 over 20 years is $5,450 per year from savings. Stack that on top of your $24,050 from Social Security, and you are pulling in around $30,000 a year against $62,000 in actual living costs. That $32,000 gap is not going to close by itself. Now, here's the fresh news that just broke. In February 2026, the Congressional Budget Office released its latest analysis of the Social Security Trust Fund and moved the depletion date forward from 2033 to 2032, a full year sooner than what people were planning around. And what happens when that fund runs dry? Under current law, the Social Security Administration cannot pay out more than what is coming in. The Social Security trustees say that at the point of depletion, only 77% of scheduled benefits would be payable. That is a 23% across-the-board cut. So that $2,071 monthly check drops to roughly $1,595, just like that. And here's the part almost nobody is talking about. The new senior tax deduction worth up to $6,000 per person, which Congress just passed and sounds like great news on the surface, actually reduces the tax revenue flowing back into the Social Security Trust Fund. Analysts are now saying it could push the 2032 depletion date even earlier. Washington handed seniors a small tax break and simultaneously pulled the chair out from under the whole program. So let's look at the map, because this is where the story gets really specific and where the data shows you exactly which Americans are feeling the most pressure. Vermont leads the country. 25.8% of Vermont residents aged 65 and older are still in the workforce. That is more than 1 in 4 seniors still working past the traditional retirement age. Nebraska is right behind at 23.9%. Then New Jersey at 23.8%, Maryland at 23.7%, and Rhode Island rounding out the top 5. Look at that list. 4 of the top 5 are northeastern states, some of the most expensive places to live in the entire country. That is not a coincidence. When your fixed income is getting eaten alive by high housing costs, high property taxes, high insurance premiums, and high everything else, you keep working. Not because Vermont or New Jersey are great places to find flexible senior employment, but because the cost of stopping is too high. New Jersey, for reference, has the highest property taxes in the country. Average HOA fees in the Northeast have jumped 60% or more in many communities over the last few years. When those expenses are in your budget, a $2,071 Social Security check does not go as far as retirement brochures told you it would. Nebraska sits in that top group for a different reason. Agriculture does not have a retirement age built into it. Farming communities operate on a different clock entirely. You work the land as long as you physically can. There is no desk to clean out at 65 and a gold watch waiting for you in a conference room. The fields still need tending. And so, the participation rate in Nebraska reflects that cultural reality just as much as financial pressure. Now, go to the bottom of the map. West Virginia at around 13%, Mississippi at around 14%, Arkansas is at around 15%. People see those low numbers and assume it means seniors there are more financially comfortable. That is completely backward. The reason participation is low in West Virginia is not that seniors there have bigger 401ks or better pensions. The local economy in West Virginia does not offer a lot for older workers to do. Opportunity is limited, and health outcomes in West Virginia are among the worst in the nation, which means people are being forced out of the workforce by their physical condition, not walking away with enough money to live on. Low senior workforce participation in a low-income state is not comfort. It is usually the opposite. Now I want to talk about something that has become a real phenomenon in 2026, and it has a name: job hugging. That is exactly what it sounds like. Older workers holding on to their current jobs with everything they have, not because they want to stay forever, but because they are terrified of what happens if they let go. Think about it from their perspective. A January 2026 AARP survey found that 64% of workers aged 50 and older said they had either experienced or witnessed age discrimination in the workplace. 64%. And the formal complaints tell the same story. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission received 11,500 age discrimination complaints in 2022. That jumped to 14,144 in 2023, then 16,223 in 2024, going up every year, consistently. And because most people who experience age discrimination never file a formal complaint, those numbers are almost certainly a significant undercount of what is actually happening. Glassdoor reported something even more striking. Mentions of ageism in job seeker comments skyrocketed 133% in the first quarter of 2025 compared to the same period the year before. That is not a small uptick. That is a massive surge in older workers feeling like the job market is actively working against them. So, when you combine that reality with the financial math we just walked through, you get job hugging. You know that if your employer shows you the door, finding a new one is going to be an uphill fight. You know the job market looks at a resume with 40 years of experience and sometimes sees expensive and going to leave soon instead of exactly what we need, so you stay. You absorb things you would not have tolerated at 45. You keep your head down, because the alternative is too costly to risk. And here is where this gets bigger than just current seniors. More than half of Generation X, the people born between 1965 and 1980 who are turning 61 this year, say they do not think they have saved enough to retire at 65. Which means the generation right behind the baby boomers is looking at the same math, seeing the same gap, and is going to face the same job, hugging reality within just a few years. The pipeline is full, and it is heading in one direction. Here is something I want to acknowledge, because I try to give you the full picture, and not just the most alarming version of events. Not every senior still working is miserable about it. A University of Michigan poll of Americans aged 50 to 94 found that 71% of workers over 65 said their job had a positive impact on their mental health. 67% said they felt physical benefits from staying active and engaged. And in separate surveys, close to 60% of professionals near retirement age said they work partly because they genuinely enjoy it. So it is not a simple story where 11.2 million people are all suffering and desperate and wishing they could escape. Some people truly want to keep going. Some people find real meaning in their work and their workplace relationships and the structure that comes with a job. And that is a legitimate thing. But here is what I think gets lost in those numbers. When the system leaves you no financially viable exit, the question of whether you want to stay becomes kind of secondary. You can enjoy your job and simultaneously have no real retirement option available to you. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. And when the data shows that 48% of people who returned to work after retiring said money was the primary driver, and 41% of active senior workers say their main motivation is paying living expenses, that tells you a lot about how much of this so-called choice is actually a choice. 38.3% of seniors who are working are doing so part-time. That flexibility is clearly important to people. And older workers are 2 times as likely to be self-employed as workers under 65. A lot of seniors who cannot get a traditional employer to take a shot on them end up consulting in their former field or building something independent. But part-time work and self-employment come with variable income, no employer benefits, and no protection from the same rising costs that are squeezing everyone else. The flexibility is real. The stability is not. And by the way, loan use from retirement accounts increased by more than 20% since 2022, and participation in employer-sponsored retirement plans actually declined slightly over that same period. So, Americans are borrowing against their future retirement savings while contributing less to them going forward. That is pressure from both ends simultaneously, and it gets worse every year it continues. Let me get into what the Social Security situation actually means for the timeline, because I think most people still do not fully understand what is coming or how fast. 10,000 Americans turn 65 every single day right now. That pace continues through 2030. By 2030, more than 1 in 5 Americans will be over the age of 65. That is 20% of the total population, depending heavily on a program that is currently running at a deficit and has been since 2021. The ratio of workers supporting each Social Security recipient has already dropped from around 5 to 1 a few decades ago down to about 2.7 to 1 today. And with more boomers retiring every year, that ratio keeps getting worse. This is the structural math behind the 2032 depletion date. It is not a political problem or a management problem. It is a demographics and math problem. And the Congressional Budget Office has now confirmed it is arriving a year sooner than expected. The options on the table are not comfortable. Congress could raise the payroll tax rate above the current 12.4%, which means both workers and employers pay more. They could raise or eliminate the cap on Social Security taxable wages, which is currently set at $184,500 in 2026. They could reduce the annual cost of living adjustment formula. They could raise the full retirement age again beyond the current 67 for people born in 1960 or later. Or they could let the cuts happen, which nobody wants to say out loud, but which becomes more likely every year that nothing is done. And on top of all of this, the Social Security Administration has been cutting thousands of staff and closing field offices throughout 2026. Benefits are not being reduced yet. But access to the system is getting harder. processing claims is getting slower. For seniors who need to navigate an appeal or make changes to their benefits, the experience is increasingly difficult. And for the millions of Americans who are going to enter that system in the next 5 to 10 years, it is going to be a system under significant strain. Now I want to walk through something that I think is the most important part of all of this, because if you're under 55 right now, this information is genuinely actionable. The median retirement income for Americans 65 and older sits at $58,680 per year in 2026. The mean is higher at $89,920, but that number is pulled up by high earners. The median is the number that represents most people, $58,608 a year. That is $40,890 a month. It sounds livable until you realize it is already below the $62,000 average in annual expenses, and it already includes people who have retirement accounts, pensions, investment income, and part-time work layered on top of Social Security. For the people who arrive at 65 with just Social Security and whatever little is left in a savings account, the picture is much tighter than that median suggests. In the 18 largest cities in America that Pew Charitable Trusts examined, the median income for older households was only $51,000 below the national median. And in those same 18 cities, an average of 16.5% of older residents were living below the poverty line. An additional 10.1% were classified as low income, meaning their earnings were between 100% and 149% of the poverty level. So in America's biggest cities, more than 1 in 4 seniors is either in poverty or right on the edge of it. Not in some obscure rural area, in the cities where most people live. And the industries that are currently absorbing the most senior workers are K-12 education, hospitals, and real estate. In 2024, K-12 schools employed more workers aged 65 and older than any other single sector, followed by hospitals. Legal services, consulting, and social assistance also have significant older worker populations. These are not low-pressure, easy-on-the-body sectors. These are demanding jobs that require real engagement and real energy. The idea that 70 and 72-year-olds are just sort of puttering around in low-stakes part-time positions does not match what the employment data actually shows. So, let me bring all of this together, because I want to leave you with something you can actually do with this information. First, stop building a retirement plan that relies heavily on Social Security staying at its current level. The CBO says the trust fund runs out in 2032. The trustees say 2033. Either way, a potential 23% cut in benefits is on the table if Congress does not act, and the longer they wait, the more severe whatever fix they come up with has to be. Plan for a reduced benefit, and let anything above that be a bonus. Second, if you are still working and you have access to an employer retirement plan, the 401k contribution limit in 2026 is now $24,500. If you are 50 or older, catch-up contributions let you go above that. Max out whatever you possibly can while you still have earned income to contribute. Every year you wait compounds in the wrong direction. Third, understand the earnings limit if you are considering returning to work while collecting Social Security before your full retirement age. The limit in 2026 is $24,380 per year. Earn above that, and Social Security withholds $1 for every $2 over the limit. It does not disappear. It gets credited back to you when you reach full retirement age, but it affects your cash flow in the near term, and you need to account for it. Fourth, if you are in your 40s and this all sounds like a problem for future you, look at the median retirement savings of $101,000 for households approaching retirement age and ask yourself whether you are on track for something significantly above that. Because $109,000 does not bridge a $32,000 annual income gap for very long. And fifth, if you are already retired and the math is not working, the data says you are not alone. 3.5 million people tried to retire in just the last 6 months and went back to work. The age discrimination is real, but so is the opportunity for self-employment, consulting, and part-time flexible work in sectors that are actually hiring older workers. The retirement system in this country was built for a different era. 11.2 million seniors are still in the workforce in 2026 because that system has not kept up with what it costs to actually live. 14.8 million are projected by 2033, And the Social Security Trust Fund runs out in 2032 with a 23% cut, waiting on the other side if nothing changes. That is the actual state of retirement in America right now. And the time to adjust to that reality is before it lands on you, not after. If this video gave you something useful, make sure you are subscribed, share it with anybody in your life who is still operating on outdated assumptions about retirement, and I will see you in the next one.